Welcome to the January 2015 Food for Thought Education Series. Today we will be discussing the best practices for managing your food costs. Our speakers today are Jackson Lamb from Metropolitan State University and David Coder from Sysco Denver. We will be taking questions at the end of the session. If you are on the webinar, please submit questions by entering them into the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner. For those that are here in person, please raise your hand and we will repeat your question so it is heard by those on the webinar. I will now pass it over to Jackson, who will get the session started.
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, all of you that have shown up here at the CRA headquarters. I'm delighted with the crowd. So, anyway, today we're looking at back to basics, how to set up the systems to track your food costs. So let's start at the very beginning, and my question is, why track your food costs? What's the point behind all of that? Well, in the big picture, it gives you the ability to track your financial health in one specific area. And I need to say that I've been in I teach now at Metro State, but I was active in the industry for about 25 years. There's a lot of operations out there that don't take inventory at all. You know what they do is they have a bunch of inventory, they buy some more inventory, and by the time they pay their bills at the end of the month, they hope they have something left over. Well, if we're going to be successful in this industry, we need to be a little bit more aggressive in knowing what our financial health is. Okay? Why track your food costs? It'll help you determine the usage of most of your inventory, what moves and what doesn't. I would imagine that if you're listening in or if you're here today, are you sitting on inventory that you'll never use? Mistakes that we did in purchasing, Sysco's not going to take it back or anybody else, or it's something that we needed, we opened it up, and now what do we do with it? So taking inventory allows you to really, it helps you recognize those items that are either moving quickly through your system or not. Tracking inventory serves as a basis for performance with key personnel. You know, if you have a bonus system structured for people in the kitchen, usually the executive chef, if he's running a 49% food cost, do you want to give him a bonus? Well, if you want to reward them on performance, we've got to be able to track that. So that's another reason why we want to do this. And then lastly, it shows the staff that there is a concern for food costs. You know, if you don't show a concern for food costs, believe me, your staff isn't going to show a concern either. So when they see that you're going through the steps of tracking your invoices and counting your inventory and comparing your usage to sales, they'll step up because all of a sudden they recognize that now this is accountable. David, you've been in the business for a long time. Do you concur?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what you said there at the end, and paying attention to that and having the management and the ownership pay attention to that inventory really does send a strong message to the staff. If you had stacks of money sitting on the shelves around the restaurant, I would guess that at the end of the day you would be counting that money. Well, that's really what you've got when you've got steak sitting there, boxes of lettuce, cans of tomatoes. Those all represent things that you've purchased. Those are products that you own. Look at it like stacks of money. You count them at the end of the day, at the end of the week. You need to do the same thing with your food.
Very good. You know, I've got just a great story. Years ago, I had my linen guy. He's delivering. We're going through tablecloths. We're going through napkins. So, you know, I'm in the storeroom, and he says, well, here's your, 50 tablecloths. So I turn around, I put them in one of these locking cages. We know what those look like, the rolling Metro racks with the doors on them. He gives me the napkins. I put them into the locking cage. He gives me the bistro aprons that the waiters would wear. I put that in the locking cage. Then he hands me 2 big stacks of kitchen towels, and I just put them on the counter. He says to me, are you going to lock those up? I said, no, they're just towels. And the driver says to me, you know, if you don't put a value on those, nobody will. So maybe in your own operation, if you put out 20 towels in the morning, do they use all 20 towels? Darn right they do. If you check your hamper, you might see 4, 5, 6 of them in there unused because people are cleaning up when they're done. Something to consider. So just like David said, when the staff sees that you're concerned about food costs, they fall in line as well. Terrific. Alrighty, let's move on. So how hard is it to set all this up? Well, you know, there's two concerns here. And the one lady in the audience, what's your name? What is it, Courtney? Courtney mentioned earlier she was talking about plate costing. Well, plate costing is a sub-factor of taking monthly inventory, but plate costing is just as important. It really is the very basics of how we get started. We want to have a sandwich. We want to put a burger on the menu. Well, first of all, when we're looking at ground beef, and David, this is your area too, you know, we can buy a 4-ounce patty, a 6-ounce patty, an 8-ounce patty. We can buy a patty that's ground beef. We can buy ground chuck, ground sirloin, ground round. We can get 80-20, 85-15, 93-7 in the fat content. So even something as very basic as a hamburger, which size, which portion, what quality will we use, they all carry different values. Okay? Buns, you know, we can go to King Soopers and buy, I think it's 8 for $1. Isn't that right? That's a 12-cent bun. Well, is that the bun you want to use in a high-end restaurant? Probably not. So we recognize that there are 25-cent buns, there are 35-cent buns. Heck, there's a 50-cent bun. You're in the bun business, the bread business over there, so you recognize that. So as we continue to build a burger, is what I'm saying, what is the cost of one slice of tomato, one slice of onion, one square of lettuce, and those pickles, okay? Pickled chips, they're the kind of McDonald's use, they're cheap. But those nice big kosher spears, 12, 15 cents a piece. So all of that has to factor into, ultimately, the sell price for each individual item, okay? And that in itself could be a separate seminar. Really what we're going to talk about today is how do we take an inventory and determine, by looking in the rearview mirror, how much was our food cost this past week, this past month, or this past time period, all right? So, to get this set up, number one, determine a time frame, okay? And we're going to give you some options there. You'll have to create a purchase log, and we'll give you more information about that. You'll have to establish inventory sheets. Back in the old days, we would do it all by hand. Nowadays, we can create an Excel spreadsheet and do it on the laptop while we're taking inventory. If we're buying items by weight, such as fish, such as beef, such as potatoes, onions, we should probably have a scale so we can get an accurate weight of the items that we're sitting on in storage. Probably 1 or 2 assistants, depending on how big of an inventory that you have, because one of the things that we'll talk about later is we have inventory all over the house. You know, if you've got, you might have A1 sauce in the storeroom, you've got A1 sauce on the line, you've got A1 sauce out in 2 bus stations in the dining room. Are all of those going to get counted? Well, it depends, and we'll talk about that later on. And then, depending on the time frame that we're looking at, we need to have the sales figures so that we can actually compare the usage to the sales. And that is how we test our financials. Very good. David, any comments on that?
Just on the purchase log and inventory sheets, Jackson, you and I are both old-timers, so we used to write it down on a scratch piece of paper, but
legal pad. Yeah.
There's an app for that now. So
yes, there is.
There are a lot of applications, and Sysco has one called Sysco Counts, and there are many others. But you can walk through your restaurant with an iPad and you know, determine the value of what your inventory is pretty quickly and pretty easily.
Yeah. David, since you opened that door, can we get a scanner and scan labels like the drivers do?
Yeah, absolutely. You need to set up your own barcodes for that, but the way the program that we have works, it works with your phone. You can use your phone as the scanner, or you can buy a separate scanner and scan those barcodes right in to establish what your dollar value is of those items.
Excellent. All right. Well, then let's just go right to the next slide and let's talk about time frames. Okay. So, and while we've got 5 different choices here, I have worked with every system. Many years ago, I was the executive chef at Rose Medical Center. Rose is not in the business to make money on their food. In fact, it's really considered a non-commercial food operation. We took inventory officially once a year, and we really did that for the accounting department. But when you're going through $100,000 of groceries a week, you're taking inventory every day. You know, I had a really good sense of what I had on a day-to-day basis, but only once a year did accounting say, hey, we need a full recollection of what you've got back there. In fact, once a year, I come into accounting, here's my inventory, they look at it, let's go to the storeroom. I said, what are you talking about? We want to make sure that this is accurate. So they point out 3 items, I show them where it is on the shelf, they're just confirming, I said we had 6 cases, there's 6 cases on the shelves, thank you, Chef Lamb. So yearly is typically what we'll see in a non-commercial environment. Okay? Quarterly. Depends on the operation, but that would be every 3 months. That would typically be done for an operation that has been running a consistent food cost positively for a period of time. As it says here, corporate operations with good consistency, time after time. Okay? Monthly is probably the most common, and typically we're going to see inventory align with the first day of the month or the last day of the month. So how many times, David, did you have to come in the morning of the first of the month, and we would sit down and either with the legal pad or now with the scanner, count everything that is in the walk-ins, in the freezers, in the reach-ins, everything that we have put a value on. And not everything has a value. We'll discuss that later, but taking inventory leads to doing it consistently. David, go ahead.
I generally say that January 1st was the most inaccurate inventory of the year.
I can't imagine why that might be, but, you know, we live in Denver, but I grew up in New York where, you know, last call's at 4 a.m., so, you know, add a little bit more to that. We come down into taking inventory weekly. You know, a lot of times when operations are seeing their food costs spiking consistently, we want to stop the bleeding. And so taking inventory on a weekly basis does make sense. You know, taking inventory also, if you have established par levels of your various goods, taking inventory actually helps you in the ordering process as well. And then taking daily inventory. And I've worked at a place that we took daily inventory, large steakhouse in New York, and we were hemorrhaging money. We had a theft problem. We had a receiving problem. And so as a result, finally the accounting office said, listen, let's just start taking inventory every day, and we can kind of see where the problems are. So, so there's 5 different options from a time frame perspective. Okay? Terrific. And we move on. Then the question becomes, where are all those invoices for all the items that we've been receiving? Oh, did we have to save those? So yes, that's critical for us to test our financial health. So we should create a receiving log or a purchase log as things are received. How much did we buy last week in meat, in fish, in groceries, in baked goods, in produce, in dairy? And if we bought beer, wine, alcohol, supplies, let's not mix that up. We're just doing food right now. So a purchase or a receiving log, it helps establish specific categories that we're purchasing. And as we record the invoices that as they come in, we should break down an invoice to specific categories: meat, seafood, groceries, baked goods, as I just mentioned. We've got an example on the next page of what that should look like, all right? We should record all purchases, cash and charge purchases. You know, a lot of operations, you know, we get 1 delivery a week or 2 deliveries a week, but oh my gosh, we're out of tomatoes. Quick, go to King Soopers and buy 20 tomatoes. Happens all the time. We've got to make that part of the receiving log, okay? And then at the month's end, let me back up. We should be recording all of our purchases in the proper columns, and at the same time, how much did we just pay for those tomatoes? How much did we just pay for the fish or the meat or the groceries? And we should be recording what the latest price was. So when we actually get to inventory, we're calculating the value of our inventory based on the prices that we're paying. You know, we should all know that produce is very seasonal. Right now we're paying the highest for tomatoes. Right now they're about $3 a pound. But in the summer, they're $1 a pound. Well, is your inventory sheets reflecting the current price that you're paying? It would do you no good to take inventory in January and record your inventory against last summer's produce prices. You'd be in the hole before you got started. So it's critical that we maintain the current pricing structure of all the items that we're purchasing. David, anything else on that?
No, I agree with you. Keeping that accurate is easier than it used to be. The invoices can be emailed to you. You can dump a lot of that information down onto a spreadsheet. So it's relatively easy to keep track of your ongoing prices, and it is absolutely critical. And we're not going to talk too much more about plate costs, but you know, when you were talking about plate costs back here, that accurate pricing that you have is very critical to that.
David, does Sysco have a, so if we were just getting started, okay, I've never set this up before. Could I call Sysco and talk to my salesman and say, hey, I've been purchasing from you for the last 6 months. Could I get the itemized sheet of what I've been buying?
Yep.
Beautiful. So in order to get set up, there's a big time saver right there dealing with your supplier. Very good. Alrighty, let's go to the next. Here is a great example of a receiving log. So as you can see, we've got a series of invoices being received here in the left-hand column. It appears that they're all coming from the same supplier. We've got different invoices with corresponding with the different dates. And then here's the total amount of each invoice, but then that invoice is broken down to how much of that was meat, how much of that was produce, how much was grocery, and the total of all our components should equal the invoice total. So here all of a sudden, now we're taking what we're purchasing and we are breaking it down to specific categories. Okay? I don't want to get too far ahead here, but when you break your inventory down into categories like this, and then when you finally take your inventory and your inventory is high, you can actually isolate, is it high in the meat category? Is it high in the produce category? Is it high in the dairy category? So breaking your purchasing out like this and then taking inventory that way gives you the opportunity to determine, am I losing stakes? Are we have things walking out the door? And that's exactly what that is designed to do. I remember working for the old La Bola chain 25 years ago, and that's how they did it. And that it really does isolate problems. You know, we can spend a day trying to find 1, 2, or 3 points in food costs, but when you have your categories isolated, then if the meat category spike, you know that you have a problem either in the way we recorded the receiving log, or maybe it's in the actual pricing, or maybe instead of writing down 50 pounds of tenderloin, we wrote down 5 pounds by mistake. And this happens. Tenderloin, what's the current price on tenderloin? Choice, no roll. Let's say it's $10 a pound. Well, the difference between 5 pounds and 50 pounds, that's substantial. So human error sometimes falls into place. So this is a great example of how to break your invoices out so that we know how much we're purchasing in each category. This is just partial, and we're talking about food today, but imagine taking this and extending it, and then there's the wine category, there's the beer category, there's the liquor category. Then there's supplies, repair, and maintenance. What if Metropolitan comes and has to fix your oven? What do you do with that invoice? It still goes on the receiving log, but it goes into the proper category over here. And to be honest with you, those other categories probably align with your profit and loss statement. So those are all expenses we're looking to control. We go to the next screen here. If we go to the next screen here, there you go. So here we go, creating inventory sheets. Well, we just discussed, if you're dealing with a supplier such as Sysco, get a hold of your rep and have him partner with you on getting this put together. It's going to benefit him just as much as it's going to benefit you. Okay? Prices that we pay are found on the invoices, and those prices that we pay for a number 10 can of marinara sauce or a pound of ahi tuna, that price per pound or price per can should be reflected in your inventory sheets. So the inventory sheets and the purchase log are cousins, if you will, and they should be worked on together. The very first time that you're trying to take inventory, I say here, handwrite it the first time, then convert it to Excel. You know, if you're starting from scratch, and David, we actually talked about this earlier, but sure, you can sit down and start typing. I can remember being in a freezer with a laptop trying to type everything out, but actually handwriting it is not a bad idea, and then when you're out of the freezer, you can convert it, all right? But the most important thing is understanding the concept of shelf to sheet or sheet to shelf. David, do you know that one?
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that?
When you walk through, you can set up your inventory system in such a way that you know, if you're in the freezer, you want to have your freezer sheet and have everything on your sheet exactly in the order that it is.
Exactly. So that maybe you're the one that's recording. If you're doing this alone, let's look at it that way. The way everything is on the shelf is exactly the way it's on the sheet. So you're just going to go down one line item at a time and everything's in order. Okay? That certainly makes sense. What if your inventory sheet was in alphabetical order? Okay, tomatoes, canned. Oh, wait a second, that's on page 4. And we have to go down to page 4, find that line item, and then record the number. Okay, the next one is tomatillos. Oh, it's a T. It's on the same page. The next one is beets, canned. Oh, we got to go back to the first page. Okay? When we go back and forth, there might have been a whole section on the shelf that we completely did not count because we're going alphabetically. So when we use the term from shelf to sheet, it really ensures that we are getting an accurate count shelf by shelf, item by item. So that makes sense. Thank you, David. That was perfect. Very good. I mentioned here, do we have the same product in multiple locations? I used A1 sauce earlier, but you know, let's take something like lemons. We've got lemons in the walk-in. Okay, we've got lemons on the cook line. We've got lemons behind the bar. We might have lemons in the refrigerator in the bus station. Depending on your policy, some restaurants say, listen, once it's come out of the storeroom and out of the walk-in and into the dining room, we don't count it anymore. Okay? I've got 42 open bottles of Hunt's ketchup. They're gone, okay? Once they're issued, we will count those. Or count them. It's your choice, but whatever you do, do it consistently every time. So we can't count everything in the dining room one time and then not count it the next time, because otherwise we're going to get an inaccurate value of what our inventory is.
Consistency is
go ahead, David. What
I say consistency is the key.
Consistency is the key. Same product in multiple locations. So again, now we have states in the freezer, states in the walk-in, states in the reach-in, and maybe we've got states on the line in one of those drawers. So, you know, we may have a situation in our inventory sheet where we identify reach-in, walk-in, freezer, and we have an example of that on the next page. You know, what if the day before, we have one of the prep cooks, they made 10 pounds of guacamole, okay? There's a value there. If they didn't make the guacamole, we'd be counting 20 avocados. But now they made avocado, now they have made a guacamole. What is the value of guacamole by the pound? If you're taking bones and making stock, and there's 15 gallons of stock in the walk-in, what is the value of that stock? So foods that are prepped, you know, okay, bones, we roast bones, we add mirepoix, we make stock. We take stock and we reduce it, we make demi-glace. What's the value of that? So when you really think about it, all of those items carry a value, all right? If we have, we make Bloody Mary mix. Okay? We buy the big number, are they number 5 cans, David? Tomato juice?
Yeah.
Number 5 versus number 10s.
Mm-hmm.
And the bartender, it's Saturday night, here we are taking inventory because tomorrow's Sunday brunch and they've just made 5 gallons of Bloody Mary mix. In fact, I used to work at Governor's Park next door, secret recipe, 10 ingredients. But as we're taking inventory and we see all of these spices and all this tomato juice in a 5-gallon bucket, what is the value of that? Because if we say it doesn't have a value and we write 0, we might be taking a hit on our food costs down the road. Okay? There was one other item on the previous sheet there, Sarah, if you could just go back real quick. Yeah, counting consistently each time. So maybe at Heidi's Brooklyn Deli there, you might want to consider everything that has been prepped in the back, but maybe everything that has been opened, such as the packets of mayonnaise and the packets of mustard. But once we open the box, we're not going to count them. That's a house decision. But as long as you're doing it consistently every time, it's okay. All right? If we go to that next sheet, Sarah, that's exactly, this is what a regular inventory sheet should look like. We've got the category or the item. You can see this is in alphabetical order. We talk about the unit size. So are we counting baguettes by the case or by the each? Miniature baguette by the case or by the each? Kaiser rolls by the dozen. That makes sense. Bread is by the loaf. You can you can count marinara sauce by the case. You can count it by the number 10 can. So there you've got options on how you set it up. All right? And then here's a blank column. You would actually put in the numerical value of how many baguettes you have. If this is done in Excel, that will automatically calculate your total to give you a value. This is an example of one column of what we're putting in for quantity. The next one, Sarah, if you just go to the next screen. Here we go. Same inventory sheet, but we might have baguettes in the freezer. We might have some in the walk-in. There might be some on the cook's line. So multiple locations is something that we need to bear in mind as we're getting things set up. David, where else would we be seeing items like this? You know, I would imagine there's various refrigerators. There's refrigeration behind the bar. We've got olives. We've got cherries. We've got celery. All that stuff is out there.
Yeah, and depending on the size of the place or this type of location, if you're a hotel, you could have multiple kitchens, and you've got a whole other dragon sleigh there.
Exactly.
You're in.
You know, before we move on, let's just take a look at this sheet. And as we take a look at our items and we take a look at our prices on the right-hand side, you know, this is the price column that I'm talking about. We should be looking at our invoice. Okay, we just received a bread delivery. Let's just do bread only today on the invoice. We look at the invoice, and it may have a case price for baguette. We might actually have to get the calculator out and figure out what is the case price, what is the yield of that case. Let's divide the yield by the case to get the per unit or the each price. So, but we should be certainly, if we have blanks here, that means that it's a brand new item we've never purchased before. Or let's say this is our inventory sheet, and we decide that we want to bring in marble rye. Okay, I've got regular rye and I've got pumpernickel, but I don't have marble rye. We can certainly insert another line in there in Excel, and since we're buying that marble rye for the first time, go ahead and take a look at the invoice and punch in the proper price per loaf, I would imagine. And then when we take inventory next week or whenever that is, we're already set up. Great. Yep. All right. Pricing and counting. David, you want to take this one? You start and I'll finish. How's that sound? Okay?
Good. Yeah, I mean, we kind of talked about a lot of this stuff, but you typically by the each, by the pound, determines on how you pay for it typically. If it's a catch weight item, I would measure it by the pound. If it's something that you get charged for, if you're buying a case of it and there's individual units in it, then you do it by the each. And the box or the case, I think that makes it easier and therefore makes it less intimidating for your kitchen staff to be counting it. When I would do that kind of thing, if it was a volume amount, I would often give myself 3 measures. I would go 0.25, 0.5, 0.75. I wouldn't worry about anything in between there. So if you're, if you're buying your fryer oil or your salad oil in 5-gallon containers, but you're paying for it by the unit, so you're paying for one price for that 5-gallon, then check it out by the quarter, by the 0.5 and 0.75. Just
another way to look at that is we rarely purchase by the each, okay? Especially if we're dealing with a major supplier. But when we look at by the case or by the box, you brought up a very good point. Let's say that we're buying heads of romaine lettuce. There's 24 heads to a case, okay? So, and we're sitting on 2.5 cases. Are we going to go through and count 26, 27, 28, 29 heads of lettuce? Or do we call it 2.5 cases of lettuce? And so again, we would call it the way we had priced it on the inventory sheet. That's exactly what you had just said. So that certainly makes sense. Just previously, we were talking about items that are already prepped. Some great examples here is a beef stock, chicken stock, if we're in that business. Another big thing, it's not for this seminar, but stock. Make it or buy it. Again, we may put a lot of labor into making something when we might save a lot of money by buying it already made. So make or buy are decisions that, some of you are in the deli business. Why buy the bread? Make it yourself. It's only flour. But the labor you'd have to throw at it might make it unattractive. And so that's a great example of make or buy. French fries, there's another thing. I haven't seen hand-cut French fries in years until Good Times started doing it 2 years ago. And now they're cutting French fries as they go. But that's a great convenience item. Should we make the French fries from scratch or just buy them already frozen, ready to go? And they're called convenience foods because we might be paying a higher price for the food, but we're saving the money on the labor side. And that really is probably going to chew up our budgets much more than food will. Other items that are already prepped. Soups. I used to work at the Rose Medical Center. I had a soup guy. He'd make 20 gallons of soup every day, 10 gallons of one soup and 10 gallons of another. We would normally sell out. But when we didn't, okay, it's inventory time, and, what's the value of that soup? Guacamole, salad dressings. Everything has a value. Unless you got it for free, we really should be counting that, okay? If you counted it last time, count it this time. If you didn't count it last time, don't count it this time. That's the consistency factor that David Coder talked about earlier. Terrific. All right. Well, we need some tools to get this going. Probably a scale if we are buying anything by the pound. And if we bought 50 pounds of mahi-mahi and we sitting on X amount in the refrigerator, let's get an accurate count of how much mahi-mahi we are sitting on, okay? Let's not weigh the ice that it's packed in, okay? Unless, of course, we paid for that ice on the delivery. Hopefully we didn't, okay? But when we look at, and I mentioned meat, fish, produce, onions, 50-pound bag, okay? But there's a half a bag there. Well, we can just put them on the scale and get it accurately. Depending on the inventory sheet, it may say 50-pound bag of onions, $15.95, which means that really represents a 50-pound bag. As David said earlier, okay, we'll count this as a 0.5 of a bag, which is 25 pounds, but then the value would be represented properly, okay? I can't tell you the importance of a clipboard. There's nothing worse than trying to write on a piece of paper on a frozen box in a walk-in with a pen where the ink is starting to freeze. Having a clipboard, it sounds simple, but you'll recognize immediately when you don't have one. So a clipboard and pens and pencils work. Again, a lot of times pens will freeze up sometimes. Pencils tend to be consistent. I write here a laptop for instant input. Once you really know what you're doing and you have your system set up, I've done it. The last time I did inventory, I sat in my office and I had somebody in the storeroom on their cell phone, and I'm wearing a headpiece and I'm just typing as they're, okay, I'm at and as they're going down the shelf, I got 5, and all I'm hitting is next, Next, and talk about a fast way to do it. So anyway, laptops, sooner or later you got to convert that to your Excel spreadsheet that's in a computer, so the faster you can do it, the better. So I just thought that was in my first time. Here I am taking the laptop into the freezer and doing it myself, and I finally said, why don't I have somebody just get on their phone? Who doesn't have a phone these days? I'll just sit at my desk and do this, and it worked out really well. Fantastic.
And the thing about this, and we laugh about the clipboard and pens and pencils, but you need to create an environment where it's as easy as possible for the people doing the inventory to do it. Because if it's a big job and intimidating, then it's not going to get done. They're going to cut corners, and the accuracy of the inventory is just incredibly important.
Yep. And again, if you don't make it seem important, your employees are not going to make it seem important. Very good. So let's go to the next one here. So depending on when you're taking inventory, is it once a week, once a month, quarterly, we need to be able to find the sales figures for the period in question. And ideally, if you are in a food and beverage operation, you are separating your food sales from your beverage sales. That's critical. If we're going to try to take a food inventory and compare our usage to food and beverage sales, we're not going to get an accurate reading at all, and then we won't even know if we have a problem. The whole idea is to be able to compare our food costs with our food sales, okay? What is that relationship? Again, if we're trying to determine if this was an inventory situation for liquor, we want to combine our beverage costs with our beverage sales or our liquor sales. And then after that, when we're looking at labor and repair and maintenance and all other line items on a P&L, all other costs would be compared with total sales. Okay?
I just want to weigh in on one thing, and this has to do with this slide, but goes back a couple of slides too. And I'm a firm believer in the weekly inventory system, and because if you do it monthly, and if you're doing a good job running your restaurant, you're probably okay. But if you're doing it monthly, you count the stuff on the first, you get all the information to your accountant or bookkeeper, and you get all that back by the 5th or the 6th or the 7th. And if you've got a problem, well, you've had a problem going back 37 days, because if you're looking at it from the month before, you don't know that you have a problem until 37 days later. That's a lot of money that could have gone down the drain.
David, that's great advice there. It's if you're hemorrhaging, if you're bleeding, we don't want to wait another 2 weeks before we find out. So yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of places have the weekly inventory, just to make sure that things are in check. Very good. Here's an equation, but cost over sales equals percentage. And this can be food cost over food sales is food cost percentage. It could be beverage cost over beverage sales is beverage cost percentage. It could be labor cost over total sales equals labor cost percentage. So, the very simple formula, but really what we're trying to determine is what is the relationship between the cost of goods sold and the sales those goods generated. Good. Of course, in today's webinar, we're really talking about those people that are taking inventory. And so this is a little bit more complicated, but it's the exact same formula. We've got opening inventory, so we're going to go through and do all the things we've talked about and come up with a dollar value. Using our receiving log, we're going to determine what were our purchases for the last week, 2 weeks, or month, whatever time frame we're using. This gives us a total available of goods we could sell. The closing inventory, we subtract what's left, and really what we've determined there is what was the usage. How much did we really flow through in the course of this time period? And again, what we used, we compare against sales, and that's really that same formula. Cost over sales equals percentage. So it's a longer way to get there, but it's a much more accurate way as well. Using this formula, if you have taken opening and closing inventory, and you know your purchase totals and food sales, you can easily compute your food cost percentage. All right? Good. Ladies and gentlemen, this page here, I lost a $1,000 bonus 2 months in a row. I was being held accountable for food costs at a restaurant that I was the manager of about 20 years ago. And long story short, if we are purchasing food that's really being used to generate liquor sales, lemons, limes, juices, celery, all that, those items need to be taken out of your food cost and put into your liquor cost. Think about that. I wasn't doing that, and I was consistently missing my bonus by a ½ percentage point. And it took me a while to figure that one out. Bar to food transfers. Maybe in your kitchen you're using a wine for like a beurre blanc sauce. Maybe you're using beer in a beer batter for fried shrimp or fried vegetables. Maybe there's Bailey's and there's Kahlua and there's other liqueurs that we use for desserts. Well, if we're purchasing liquor that is generating food sales, those have to be taken out of the dollar value of your liquor purchases and put back on the food side. Okay? So here I am about to lose a $1,000 bonus. And the busboy comes up to me and he says, Jackson, it's Thursday night. What should we put out on a happy hour buffet? I said, oh man. I said, well, why don't we put out chips and put out salsa, celery sticks and carrot sticks and ranch dressing. Don't do guacamole, it's too expensive, but leave me alone. I'm trying to figure out where the food cost is going. 10 minutes later, another employee comes up and says, hey, Jackson, can you please sign my ticket for my employee meal? I said, yeah, leave me alone. I'm trying to figure out where the food cost is going. And as that employee walked away, literally the light bulb went off above my head. And this is how I got my bonus. Here we are putting out about $100 every Thursday and Friday, a happy hour buffet, salty foods, so people would drink more, okay? That really isn't a function of food costs. That really is marketing and advertising. And we were tracking what we were putting out there every week. All of a sudden, I recognized I can take $400 of my food costs, take it out, and move it over into marketing and advertising. And my boss says, now you're getting it. We also had a stack of guest checks on my desk that were all the employee meals. Our situation was, if you were working a full shift, you got a complimentary either burger or chicken sandwich. Well, 25 employees times 30 days, believe me, it adds up. Should the chef be sucking up employee meals and not getting his bonus? No. We took that dollar amount, we took it out of food costs, we put it into employee benefits. And, you know, I wanted to get that bonus because it was 1985 and I was going to buy myself a VCR. And so, anyway, it took me 3 months to finally crack the code, but that's a great example of where we need to recognize adjustments to our food costs that are legitimate. David, have you had that experience? You've worked on a lot of different operations also.
Yeah, same thing. And one thing I'd say, too, that can help a little bit on those food to bar and bar to food, you can request separate invoices from both, you know, your food vendors and distributors and from your liquor distributors.
Yeah, there's another trick, actually. You know, when we remember what the purchase log looked like, if we're not using limes in the kitchen and limes are coming in, move it right over to the bar category. And it doesn't even enter your purchases of food. If you're using Bloody Mary mix only for Bloody Marys or tomato juice, don't receive it in the food column. Take it right over to your alcohol column. This way, you don't have to worry about transfers at the end of the month.
Right.
Yeah, so that's a great idea. Thanks, David. Mm-hmm. So, what is the ideal food cost? Here's a question we'll throw up to our audience. Well, before anybody answers, I'm going to tell you the answer is, it depends. It depends on the operation. It depends on how much convenience foods you're making, how much foods you're making from scratch. It depends on your price point. It depends on the rest of your P&L. But I will tell you, the ideal food cost is the food cost that was last month and the month before and the month before that. Again, we're looking for that consistency. Okay? David, you're in the business. Can you shed any light on fine dining versus casual dining versus fast casual? Do you see a spread in food costs across the board there?
Yeah, absolutely. There is no right answer to that. The one thing I would say is going back to that plate cost. If you have a plate cost for everything, you know how many you sell, you know what your inventory is. You can figure out what your food cost is and also figure out what your profitability is and decide whether that 30% food cost is what you want. But it's going to be different for a steakhouse where they're paying a lot of money for their product versus a pizza place where the main purchases are flour and cheese and tomato sauce. So steakhouses, you can run 40-45% and still make plenty of money. In pizza places, if you're running 40 or 45%, you're closing your doors pretty quickly.
Yeah. A great example of that is in a steakhouse. If a place like, we'll keep names out of it, okay? But if a steakhouse is selling steaks at $40 a piece and we're dealing with prime or upper choice beef, okay? Okay, just envision the kitchen. How many guys are on the line? Probably 2 with tongs, and they're just cooking steaks, okay? I've worked in steakhouses like that. When a server needs a salad, they pull it themselves. When they need a baked potato, they pull it themselves. So you've got 2 people in the kitchen just with tongs knocking out the 12 different steaks on the menu. Of course, there's a chicken item on there and there's a fish item on there. But then you go across the street to the fine dining restaurant, okay, where everything's made from scratch, and you look in the kitchen and there's 8 white coats in the kitchen and everybody is doing a small job. An operation like that, since we have more labor, hopefully they're keeping their food costs down because their labor cost is going to be high. You can't have a high food cost and a high labor cost. That's unsustainable. So the steakhouses can get by with a high food cost because they can get by with less labor in the kitchen. But the fine dining place that's making everything from scratch, they're going to have even if they're just paying people minimum wage, they've got way more bodies in there than the steakhouse does. And so they've got to run a lower food cost to compensate for that higher labor cost. Okay? This next question, what is the difference between an ideal food cost and an actual food cost? Well, the ideal food cost is different in every restaurant, but that is your target. In fact, most operators, most owners, this is what the boss said to me, Jackson, we're running a 36.5% food cost. We need to get it down to 35. If you can get it down to 35, I'll give you $1,000. As I told you, I spent that money 5 different ways before I even got it. So that is called incentivizing your staff. You can't do it by yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. And my boss figured if he could, we were doing about $100,000 a month in food sales. If I could save $2,000 in food costs, he was going to give me half. Not bad. So when we talk about the ideal, that's the target, okay? What's the difference between ideal and the actual? Well, that's what we're trying to find out at the end of every month. And what I realized was that my difference was a half of a percentage point, 0.5%, really, which was only about $500 at the time. But so that's what we mean by ideal. And what should your food cost be is the next question. Historical data is really the best way to try to compare that. What was your food cost a year ago or 5 years ago? What if you don't know? What is the food cost for a comparable operation? Here we got Smiling Moose Deli, okay? We got Heidi's Deli. You might be on the same page there when it comes to food costs. Maybe when we're talking about food costs at an Outback Steakhouse versus a Texas Roadhouse, they might be comparable. So, sometimes we look at similar operations, but in the same city. I would imagine that if we're trying to compare an Italian restaurant in Denver to an Italian restaurant in Steamboat Springs, there's going to be some disparity there because because of delivery charges, changes in cost, etc. The next question is, what is your prime cost? And typically that is our key economic drivers. For this, it would really be food cost and labor cost. I kind of brought those together earlier. There's a gentleman that I worked with, and he contends that your food cost and labor cost should not exceed 60%. And if it is, it's a recipe for disaster down the road. They are your two biggest economic drivers, and if they're out of control, we're not going to have anything left over to pay the rest of the bills.
Right. Yeah, that's such a good point. That's a better number overall to look at if you're struggling with your food costs. I don't get too concerned about somebody complaining about a high food cost until I find out that they're running a 68% prime cost, and then you've got to step back and take a look at things, because that's as we talked about, your food costs can go up and down. You can buy onions, you can buy a bag of onions, you can buy a cryovac pack of whole peeled onions, you can buy sliced onions, you can buy diced onions. Well, where do you fall in that range? Are you buying all the way prepped onions? Well, if you do, then your food cost is going to be higher. If you're buying the onions in the bag where you've got to peel them and cut them up, then your labor cost is going to be a little bit higher. And we don't want to mix those two. However, it's worth taking a look at the end of the day.
Sure. To clarify, because what David just explained, I lived. Working at Rose Medical Center, big item that we have to prep at least 50 every day is a fruit plate. That would be a container of yogurt with diced cantaloupe, honeydew, and pineapple. So, and we get, these come in already cut in 2-gallon pails. We just assemble. So one day I call my supplier and I say, well, send me 2 buckets of pineapple, 2 buckets of cantaloupe, 2 buckets of honeydew. And they said, we don't have any. The kitchen went through a deep cleaning yesterday. We are 2 days behind. I don't have any cut fruit. I said, no problem. Send me a case of fresh pineapple, a case of fresh cantaloupe, and a case of honeydew. Well, that next morning after the deliveries came in, my prep guy says, well, where's the fruit? I said, well, I bought fresh fruit, and it's in the walk-in. I bring out a pineapple, a cantaloupe, and a honeydew, and my prep guy says, what am I supposed to do with that? So here's a person, I didn't hire him, working in the kitchen, had no idea how to attack a pineapple. Had no idea how to take a cantaloupe, cut it in half, scoop out the seeds, put the flat side down, shave all the rind off, and then cube that up. He was lost. That is a convenience food, ladies and gentlemen. And if I let him continue, it'll take him 3 hours to cut all the stuff up that we needed cut. At $12 or $15 an hour, we can't, that's not sustainable. We can't afford that. I will say, and David just mentioned this, what was that?
Well, we had one question from the webinar here.
Yeah.
Can you please repeat what the food and labor costs should be?
Food and labor costs should not exceed 60%. So if you're running industry averages, 30 to 35% on food might be a little bit high. 25% on labor might be average, but 35 plus 25 equals 60%. So as I mentioned earlier with the steakhouse, they can run that 40% food cost because they're going to run a 20% labor cost. You got to consider everybody in the front of the house. If the tip wage tax credit is in effect, they're only making $5.25 an hour. So we're saving on the front of the house labor. With the kitchen that has all the the white coats in there, they're going to run a higher labor cost, but they can actually run a lower food cost because of the physical labor that they're doing. That was a great question. Thank you. So I was in the middle of a thought question, sir.
Now, doesn't your penny profit affects that as well? I mean, you can run, I'd rather sell a $40 steak that's running a 35% food cost all day long.
Yeah.
Opposed to the $8.50 burger.
Right.
That you're dropping the same 30% on.
Exactly. Well, because of the higher volume, you're going to have more contribution margin is really what we call that. I also wanted to circle back to what David had said. So in any given operation, if we're in the sandwich business, okay, let's peel 10 onions, put them on the slicing machine. Let's slice them so that we can put them on our sandwiches. You can buy them. Red onions, already peeled, already sliced. They come in cryovac, opened, and work with them immediately. So that's a stable item. Same thing with potatoes. We can buy potatoes that have been peeled and cubed. They're in cryovac. In fact, they're already partially cooked. Again, that was a big item at Rose Medical Center because I could cook those potatoes in half the time, but I didn't have to pay somebody to chop the potatoes up. So when we look at convenience items, are you slicing pickles?
No.
You could. Okay, so that's another great example. You know, we can buy the whole pickles and then have somebody cut them, but for pennies more, we can buy the pickles already cut into the big spears, and everybody's happy with that.
Well, it's a free item as well.
What's that now?
We also consider complimentary versus if it's something we're giving to the customer.
Sure.
We're not going to put 5 extra hours of labor into it.
Exactly, and it's almost like a garnish, if you will, but again, that big kosher, that's 15 cents? Do you track that? What does that cost?
Our pickles run about 9 to 10 cents.
9 to 10 cents, yeah. Versus pickled chips. Those are the little wafer kind that you can see through if you hold them up. And that's what we see on the McDonald's burgers, and those are a penny a piece. So, but if I'm a customer, I want the big one instead of the thin one, that's for sure. Very good. So we had some great questions here today and some good information. Is there anything else that we could, is there anybody in our listening audience that has a question that we have not addressed? All righty.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone who attended and listened, and to our speakers, Jackson Lamb and David Coder. So let's give them a round of applause and tell them thank you. And you'll see it on the screen right now. We hope you'll join us next month on Tuesday, February 17th. We're going to be talking about labor law regulations. There's been some recent changes, so you'll definitely want to tune on to that to hear what's been going on. So thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you.